The summons arrived like a whisper from a dead star, cutting through the sterile hum of my solitary existence. It wasn't a formal request, it was an imperative, delivered by a man whose eyes held the weary glint of secrets too heavy to bear. He called himself the messenger, and his presence in my quiet research lab, a space usually consecrated to the cosmic ballet of equations and distant light, felt like an intrusion of raw earth. He spoke of urgency, of national security, of something that defied the known parameters of the universe. I listened, my skepticism a familiar shield, but a sliver of intrigue, sharp and cold, pierced through. Days later, I found myself deep within the sprawling concrete and steel skeleton of the radio observatory, a titan of an instrument buried in a remote desert valley. The air inside the operations center, thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee, thrummed with a low, persistent energy. Monitors glowed with cascades of data, a river of information I was told had flowed for decades, charting the faint, distant breaths of the cosmos. Now, a new current ran through it, alien and unsettling. Marcus Blake, a voice announced, firm and unyielding, pulling me from my contemplation of a particularly jagged signal pattern on a screen. Welcome. Or perhaps, unwelcome, depending on your perspective. I turned to face the director, a woman whose severe posture and sharp gaze commanded immediate attention. Beside her stood the lead technician, a younger man with nervous energy thrumming just beneath his skin, his fingers twitching as if itching to return to a keyboard. Perspective is precisely what I bring. I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the apprehension tightening my chest. And a healthy dose of doubt, I imagine. The director allowed a faint, humorless smile to touch her lips. Doubt is a luxury we can no longer afford, Marcus. Not with Acheron. The name hung in the air, heavy with history. The Acheron Probe. No signal for decades. The lead technician shifted, cleared his throat. Until 3 weeks ago. Faint at first. Intermittent, but unmistakably. Acheron. He gestured to a large holographic display that flickered to life, showing a wireframe model of the probe, rendered against a star field. A pulsing red light emanated from its core, a beacon in the black. Impossible, I murmured, stepping closer to the display. The probe's last known position was impossibly far, a journey that should have stretched its systems beyond endurance. The odds were astronomical, defying all statistical probability. What kind of signal? That's where it gets. Not engineering data. Not even scientific observations as we understand them. The lead technician, sensing his cue, began to manipulate the holographic interface. We initially thought it was corrupted, a cascade failure of its primary transmitters. But the integrity of the data stream is pristine. Flawless, even. He pulled up a series of spectral analyses, complex waveforms that pulsed with a disquieting rhythm. These are not conventional electromagnetic waves. They're something else. My gaze drifted across the screens, my mind racing, trying to categorize the impossible. The data wasn't just anomalous, it was alien in its very structure. It didn't fit into any known model of information transfer. My skepticism, though still present, was beginning to crack under the weight of the undeniable. The lead technician hesitated, glancing at the director, who gave a curt nod. He pressed a sequence, and the main holographic display shifted. Sensory. The probe isn't transmitting data points, Marcus. It's transmitting experiences. My breath hitched. Sensory experiences? From a machine decades old, millions of miles away? The thought was absurd, yet the image before me, a kaleidoscope of impossible geometries and shifting, non-Euclidean spaces, resonated with a profound, unsettling truth. I saw colors that defied the spectrum, heard frequencies that grated against the inner ear without ever making a sound. It was like glimpsing a world through a fractured lens, a reality fundamentally different from my own. We believe it's. This wasn't just a signal, it was a window. A window into something that shouldn't exist, something that twisted the fabric of perception. The swirling chaos on the screen intensified, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a presence. Not a physical presence, but an immense, malevolent consciousness, vast and indifferent, pressing against the very edges of my understanding. It was a silent roar, an echo from a place beyond light, beyond reason. My skepticism, once my fortress, crumbled. This was not a malfunctioning probe. This was a message. I was determined to understand it, to dissect it, to expose its secrets. The Acheron had returned, and it brought with it an echo from a realm of pure, unadulterated nightmare. And I, Marcus Blake, was now tethered to its impossible song. The chill of the radio observatory seemed to deepen, clinging to the metal consoles and the very air I breathed. The screen, a vortex of impossible light, pulsed with a rhythm that felt less like data and more like a slow, deliberate breath. My gut churned, a knot of something unfamiliar tightening beneath my ribs. It wasn't just a signal, it was an aperture, a raw wound in the fabric of what I understood. Marcus, the lead technician's voice, usually a steady anchor, wavered. Their finger hovered over a blinking indicator, the digits cycling too fast to read. The bandwidth is. It's not just numerical. We're picking up modulated frequencies across the entire spectrum. Auditory, thermal, even some kind of pressure wave signature. I leaned closer, the faint hum of the servers a counterpoint to the alien thrum emanating from the speakers. It was a sound I'd never encountered, a low, resonant drone that seemed to bypass my ears entirely, vibrating directly against my sternum. It was like the deep, patient grind of tectonic plates, or the slow, inexorable turning of some cosmic gear. On the main display, the swirling chaos began to resolve into fleeting, impossible geometries. Shapes that defied Euclidean space bloomed and collapsed, fractals that were not fractals, but something more fundamental and terrifying. They hinted at textures, the slick, cold sheen of obsidian, the gritty rasp of ancient, mineral dust, the porous give of something organic but utterly alien. Isolate the auditory. Filter for known frequencies, I commanded, my voice betraying none of the strange unease that was beginning to prickle at the back of my neck. I watched the lead technician's hands, usually so precise, fumble for a moment before snapping back to their task. Across the console, the data analyst, a young colleague with a usually unshakable demeanor, rubbed their temples. My head. It feels like an echo chamber. We've been staring at this for hours. Grab some coffee, take a 5-minute break. My own eyes, however, felt gritty, and a faint, phantom pressure pulsed behind them. It was nothing, I told myself, just the glare of the monitors, the late hour. We were breaking new ground, venturing into truly unknown territory. It was only natural for the mind to play tricks. Yet, the data analyst didn't move. Their gaze remained fixed on a secondary screen, where the geometric patterns were now overlaid with faint, shimmering auroras of color, hues that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It wasn't my own feeling, yet it permeated me, a wave of cosmic apathy that threatened to flatten all human striving. "The thermal readings are spiking around the data conduit," the lead technician reported, their voice now tight, strained. "And there's a neurological signature. Not human. Not any known biological pattern." "A signature?" I scoffed, forcing a cynical laugh. "It's noise. Interference. The probe is old, damaged. We're picking up stray EM fields, probably from its failing systems." But even as I spoke, the words tasted like ash. The whisper intensified, weaving itself into the bone-deep thrum, and a new element bled into the sensory stream, a deep, aching loneliness. Not the loneliness of a single being, but the echoing solitude of an entire, forgotten epoch. This was science. This was discovery. My mind, a fortress of logic and reason, would not crumble under the weight of some imagined cosmic despair. "Run a full diagnostic on the filtering algorithms," I ordered, my voice sharper than intended. "There's a corrupted data packet somewhere. We're getting bleed through." The data analyst flinched, then slowly turned to face me. "Trying to show us something. Not just data. It's..." The image on the screen twisted, the impossible geometries now forming fleeting, vast structures that hinted at impossible scales. The overwhelming sense of loneliness was abruptly replaced by something else, something predatory and ancient, a hunger that had slumbered for eons. My hands, I realized, were clenched into fists, my knuckles white. This wasn't just data corruption. This was a direct channel, pouring unspeakable truths directly into our minds, bypassing the filters of logic, eroding the very bedrock of our sanity. The overwhelming vastness of it all threatened to swallow my gaze. The image on the screen, a tapestry woven from the impossible, continued its slow, deliberate unfolding. My breath hitched, a silent, ragged thing caught in the quiet hum of the radio observatory. What I had glimpsed earlier was no trick of light, no artifact of compression. Within the churning, non-Euclidean structures, something moved. Not like a creature, not like a machine, but like a thought-given form, expanding, contracting, asserting its presence without ever quite resolving into a recognizable shape. It was a language of pure geometry, spoken by a mouth beyond comprehension, and it whispered of scales that dwarfed galaxies. It was an internal vibration, a sympathetic resonance with the impossible. This wasn't information, it was an experience, raw and unfiltered, seeping into the very fabric of my perception. "Marcus, are you seeing this?" The junior analyst's voice, tight with a nascent terror, splintered the fragile quiet. He was at his console, a few meters from mine, his face bathed in the blue-white glow of his own monitor. His fingers, usually nimble and precise, now hovered over the keyboard, trembling. I tore my eyes from my screen, the impossible geometries leaving ghostly afterimages on my retinas. "What is it?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. "Packet 734 Gamma 9. It's doing something." The junior analyst stared, his eyes wide and unblinking. His pupils were dilated, reflecting the swirling data. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. "The colors. They're too loud. And the sound. It's like 1,000 voices screaming through a single, fractured lens. I pushed back from my desk, the squeak of my chair a jarring intrusion. The floor felt strangely uneven beneath my feet as I moved towards him, a subtle shift, a momentary disorientation. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps. "Describe what you're seeing, precisely," I commanded, trying to keep my tone even, professional. My own heart, however, had begun to beat a heavier rhythm against my ribs. "It's... and the sky. The sky is a shattered mirror, reflecting something vast and hungry just beyond its shards. It's inside me, Marcus. It's walking through my mind." His body tensed, a sudden, violent shudder passing through him. He let out a choked cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror, and collapsed from his chair, hitting the industrial carpet with a thud. His eyes were still open, fixed on some unseen horror, his limbs thrashing against the floor. "Get him away from the console!" I shouted to the senior technician, who was already rushing over, his own face pale. We wrestled the junior analyst away, his struggles surprisingly strong, his cries echoing in the cavernous space of the radio observatory. He mumbled about fractured light and star-eaters before his eyes rolled back, and he fell into a fitful, shuddering unconsciousness. I knelt beside him, checking his pulse, a frantic rhythm under my fingers. The senior technician moved quickly, calling for assistance, his voice tight with concern. I looked back at the junior analyst's screen. Packet 734 Gamma 9 pulsed with an unsettling luminescence, its impossible geometry shimmering, hinting at the glass forests and shattered skies he had just described. "Neurolinguistic programming," I muttered, trying to find purchase in the shifting sands of the inexplicable. Or perhaps a form of synesthesia induced by extreme pattern recognition. I stood, moving back to my own console, a strange prickle at the edge of my vision. I turned my head quickly, but it was gone, leaving only the familiar, sterile lines of the observatory's architecture. A trick of the light, I told myself, the strain of staring at screens for too long. I pulled up packet 734 Gamma 9 on my own display, the data unfolding before me. The same impossibilities, the same unsettling beauty, the same lurking malevolence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but distinct from the steady background noise. I listened intently, tilting my head. Was it the ventilation system? A distant generator? Or was it something else? The hum intensified, weaving a strange, complex melody that seemed to speak of vast, empty spaces and unimaginable distances. I could almost make out words in its cadence, words without meaning, yet heavy with implication. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, forcing myself to focus on the data, on the numbers, on the lines of code that should have provided structure. But the lines wavered, the pixels seemed to bleed, and for a fleeting, terrifying instant, the entire screen rippled, like a pond disturbed by an unseen stone. The impossible geometries on the display seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the strange hum. It was not fear, not yet. It was something more insidious, more unsettling. A genuine unease, a gnawing certainty that the world I knew, the rational, predictable universe, was beginning to fray at the edges. And the probe, the lost vessel from Acheron, was pulling at the threads. I was starting to unravel with it. The industrial carpet, cold and abrasive against my cheek, offered little comfort. A metallic tang filled my mouth, the taste of fear and the lingering echo of a scream that had torn from my own throat. Above me, the worried face of a colleague swam into view, his voice a muffled current against the roaring in my ears. "Marcus? Are you with us?" The supervisor's voice cut through the haze, sharper, more insistent. My body ached, every muscle protesting this sudden, violent collapse. I pushed myself up, my hands trembling as they found purchase on the edge of the console. The supervisor was already crouched beside me, a hand on my shoulder, his gaze probing. "What happened?" "A flash," I managed, my voice raspy. "A sensation. Like falling into a chasm of pure thought." I waved a hand vaguely towards the main screen, where the raw data streams still pulsed, an indifferent tapestry of light and code. The others were watching me, their expressions a mixture of concern and a deepening, shared apprehension. This wasn't just data anymore, it was an infection of the mind. "Are you fit to continue?" the supervisor asked, his brow furrowed. I met his gaze, forcing a resolve I didn't entirely feel into my eyes. "I am. We need to understand this." The truth was, a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to unravel the threads of this impossible tapestry, gnawed me. The terror was a current, yes, but so was an insatiable hunger for truth, no matter how grotesque. My fingers, still unsteady, found the familiar keys. The team, chastened, returned to their stations, but the air was thick with a new, palpable tension. "I want to see what this thing is trying to show us." The technician, a quiet man who usually buried himself in his work, nodded slowly. His fingers danced across his own console, bringing up a separate display. The raw sensory input, previously a chaotic blizzard of static and fleeting, impossible shapes, began to coalesce. On the main screen, the first true landscape appeared. It was not a landscape as any human mind could conceive. Vast, impossible structures rose from a ground that seemed to fold in on itself, defying all Euclidean geometry. Angles shifted and warped, creating perspectives that were simultaneously near and infinitely distant. Colors pulsed and bled into each other, hues I'd never seen, not truly, not with this intensity. The structures were not built, they simply were. They seemed to be composed of a material that was both solid and ephemeral, shifting like smoke yet possessing the weight of mountains. Imagine a cathedral built from shattered reflections, its spires twisting into dimensions that ought not to exist. That was the closest I could come to describing it. "It's non-Euclidean," the technician mumbled, his eyes wide, fixed on the screen. "The angles. They don't add up. The light." My determination warred with a primal urge to recoil. This was beyond comprehension, beyond sanity. Yet, it was undeniably there, transmitted across unimaginable distances, a window into something utterly alien. As the images refined, gaining a terrifying clarity, I felt it again. Not a physical touch, but a sensation of being scrutinized, of a vast, unseen intelligence reaching out. The data wasn't just being observed, it felt like it was observing us. One particular structure, a towering helix of impossible angles, seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light. It was as if the data had registered my attention, had acknowledged my gaze. "Are you seeing this?" I asked, my voice tight. The way it shifts?" The supervisor, his face pale, was staring at the screen. "It's responsive. Like it's adapting to our processing." "No," I thought, a shiver running down my spine. It wasn't adapting. It was looking back. And that something was now fully aware of our presence. The air in the radio observatory, once a sanctuary of precise instruments and cool logic, had curdled into something thick and viscous, clinging to the skin like a shroud. I stood before the main console, the impossible geometries still undulating on the primary display, a silent, ancient gaze from beyond the void. It was looking back. Her eyes, usually sharp and focused, darted around the room, catching on shadows that weren't there, flitting over the faces of our few remaining colleagues as if searching for an invisible threat. "The patterns," she murmured, her voice thin, almost reedy, "they're changing again. Adapting to our presence. Or anticipating." Her fingers hovered over the holographic interface, trembling slightly. "It feels hungry." I watched her, a knot tightening in my gut. Hunger wasn't a scientific term. It was a primal fear given voice. A few days ago, he would have scoffed at such an anthropomorphism. Now, it resonated with the disturbing truth that I, too, was beginning to feel. He was hunched over a secondary terminal, reviewing spectral analyses, when he suddenly slammed his fist against the console. "It's not right," he bellowed, his voice raw, startling the few of us still awake. "The resonance frequency. It's shifting to match our own brainwaves. I swear, I can hear it now, even when the audio feed is off. A sort of grinding in the glint off the monitors. They're smiling. Oh, God, they're always smiling." A heavy silence descended, broken only by the persistent, unyielding hum. The lead analyst recoiled from him, a flicker of fear and something else, recognition, in her eyes. Smiling faces? My scientific rigor, once an impenetrable shield, felt porous, thin, like ancient parchment succumbing to damp. "It's the strain," I stated, forcing a calm into my voice that I didn't feel. "Sleep deprivation." How could I explain the way the patterns on the screen sometimes seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat? The lead technician scoffed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Strain? This isn't strain, Marcus. This is communion. It's inside us. It knows our thoughts. It's showing us what we want to see, twisting it just enough to break us." He gestured wildly at the main display, where the impossible geometries now seemed to writhe with a predatory grace. "Look at it. Our world, but wrong." I had dismissed the initial flashes as visual artifacts, the impossible angles as glitches in translation. The console's metallic gleam would momentarily take on a disturbing organic sheen. My own waking dreams had grown more vivid, more insistent. I'd close my eyes for a moment, seeking respite, only to be plunged into a landscape of shifting, non-Euclidean structures, where light itself was a living, predatory entity. Her eyes were fixed on the main display, wide with a nascent panic. Just for a few cycles. A full system shutdown. Clear the cache. Into seeing our own fears reflected back at us through a cosmic lens? Her gaze was accusatory, her paranoia now explicitly directed at me, at my perceived stubbornness. "You're just as affected as the rest of us. Don't pretend you don't feel it clawing at the inside of your skull." Her words hung in the air, undeniable. I felt the truth of them, raw and exposed. The line between what was real and what was merely a projection of the probe's horrifying data had become a gossamer thread, fraying with every passing moment. I looked from the lead analyst's haunted eyes to the lead technician's wild, despairing gaze, and then back to the primary display. Her words hung in the air, undeniable. I felt the truth of them, raw and exposed. I looked from the lead analyst's haunted eyes to the lead technician, whose face, usually a mask of detached focus, was now pale and slick with a fine sheen of sweat. His gaze darted to the colossal dish visible through the panoramic window, its skeletal framework silhouetted against the bruised twilight sky. Just for a few hours. A break. We're all pushing limits. I shook my head, a stubborn refusal solidifying in my chest. No. Not yet. We're on the verge. I can feel it. Another wave of data is imminent, a deeper layer. The lead analyst, her usually meticulous hair now escaping its bun in wisps, stepped closer. Marcus, your vitals are spiking. You haven't slept in 36 hours. We're all seeing things, hearing things. That echo you reported, the one that sounds like grinding stone in an empty chasm, it's not just you anymore. I waved her off, my attention drawn back to the main display panel, where a fractal pattern, born of the probe's latest transmission, pulsed with an unsettling, organic rhythm. It was a visual representation of the auditory data, a translation of impossible sound into impossible form. My eyes fixated on a particularly intricate convolution, a spiral that seemed to fold in on itself, defying Euclidean geometry. A faint, almost subliminal thrum began to resonate in my inner ear, a vibration distinct from the observatory's ambient noise. The hum of the servers, the distant chirping of the system alerts, all faded, replaced by that growing, resonant thrum. The fractal on the screen rippled, not just visually, but experientially. The metallic tang of the recycled air vanished, replaced by an acrid, mineral scent, like pulverized rock and ozone. The cool, controlled temperature of the command center dissolved into a profound, bone-deep chill. The walls of the radio observatory melted away, replaced by towering, obsidian spires that pierced a sky the color of dried blood. I was no longer standing on the cool, synthetic floor, but on a vast, uneven plane of what felt like solidified sorrow. The ground beneath me was not solid earth, but a tessellated surface of interlocking, non-repeating shapes, each shard reflecting a distorted image of a colossal, unseen presence. The thrum intensified, vibrating through my very bones, a sound that was also a pressure, a crushing weight on my chest. A presence. It was not visible, not tangible, but it was. It was a consciousness so ancient, so immense, that my own mind recoiled, a tiny, terrified animal caught in the shadow of a mountain. I was merely an intrusion, a fleeting thought in its eternal, horrifying calculus. The sheer scale of it, the absolute indifference, threatened to shatter my perception of self. My mind screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. Then, as abruptly as it began, it receded. The obsidian spires fractured, dissolving into the familiar, if still unsettling, fractal on the display. The acrid scent lifted, replaced by the sterile tang of the radio observatory. I swayed, catching myself on the edge of the console, my knuckles white against the cool metal. "Are you all right?" It was the lead analyst, her face etched with concern, her hand reaching for my arm. Her voice sounded distant, as if filtered through a thick veil. I looked at my trembling hands, then at the pulsating fractal on the screen, then back at the lead analyst. This was no stress-induced hallucination. I had been there. I had felt the crushing indifference, the ancient, immense presence. The probe was not just transmitting data, it was projecting a reality, and I had, for a terrifying moment, stepped into it. The line was not just frayed, it was gone. I had to understand this. I had to. Even if it meant losing everything else. The fractal pattern pulsed on the main display, a living geometry born of the probe's latest transmission. It was a visual echo of the auditory data, a translation of impossible sound into impossible form, and my eyes, unwilling to blink, remained fixed upon its shifting, breathing contours. Tendrils of violet light expanded and contracted, interwoven with threads of impossible jade, forming structures that defied Euclidean logic, yet felt profoundly, terrifyingly correct. Each undulation seemed to whisper a secret, not to my ears, but directly to the deeper currents of my mind, a resonance that vibrated through the very bones of my skull. The air in the radio observatory felt heavy, charged not just with static electricity, but with an unseen weight, a pressure building behind my eyes. A low, guttural sound, not from the speakers, but from across the console, pulled my gaze. A colleague, the one who meticulously catalogued the sonic signatures, sat hunched, his hands clamped over his ears, fingers digging into his scalp. His face, usually a mask of quiet concentration, was now a canvas of stark terror, pale and slick with sweat. He swayed slightly, a tremor running through his frame. I'd noticed his increasing agitation over the past few days, a twitch in his eye, an unnerving habit of staring at blank walls, his voice occasionally fracturing mid-sentence. We all felt the pressure, the subtle creep of the probe's influence, but this was something different. This was a fracture opening. It's not sound, he rasped, his voice raw, strained. It's a texture. A grinding. The fractal on the screen seemed to mock me, its impossible beauty a veil over something monstrous. He didn't answer me directly. Instead, he pushed himself up, stumbling towards a heavy console, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. His eyes were fixed on the probe's primary data stream, a torrent of raw, uninterpreted sensory inputs. A gaping maw. It sees through the gaps in thought. It knows the space between what is and what never was. His voice rose, cracking with a frantic, desperate energy. It's here. His gaze flickered to a stack of servers, their indicator lights blinking innocently, then to the main power conduit leading into the central processing unit. It's how it gets in. The wires. The current. We have to sever it. Sever the vein. Before I could react, before the nearest security personnel could even draw breath, he swung the wrench in a wild, arcing motion, aiming for the thick cables that snaked across the floor. A guard, quicker than the others, tackled him mid-swing. The screaming light. It's all connected. We are the dream of something vast and terrible. Chaos erupted. Security personnel swarmed, subduing the struggling colleague, their faces grim, their movements efficient. The project director, a woman whose composure was usually as unyielding as bedrock, appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She surveyed the scene, her gaze lingering on the colleague, now limp and sobbing, being led away. Her eyes then met mine, a silent accusation in their depth. "Shut it all down," she commanded, her voice cutting through the lingering echoes of the screams. "Every system. Isolate the probe's signal. No more transmissions. No more analysis. Project Acheron is on immediate hold, pending a full review. The words hit me like a physical blow, yet beneath the shock, a strange, persistent hum began to resonate within me. The probe's transmissions, the impossible geometries, the terrifying textures, they had already burrowed deep, taken root in the collective subconscious of the team, and most powerfully, in mine. The images, the sensations, flickered behind my eyelids even now, demanding to be understood. As the technicians began the methodical process of powering down the systems, the vibrant fractal on the main display slowly faded, its impossible colors draining away, leaving behind a blank, sterile screen. I watched the director confer with a senior official, their hushed tones carrying the weight of serious implications. It was the point. The probe hadn't just been transmitting data, it had been transmitting awareness. Later, as the radio observatory emptied, the air still thick with the residue of panic and fear, I lingered. The official orders were clear, access revoked, research halted. But the pull was irresistible. The colleagues' tortured revelations, fragmented as they were, had only intensified my own hunger for understanding. I felt the probe's presence still, a silent, insistent whisper in the quieted hum of the machinery. My gaze drifted to a small, isolated terminal, tucked away in a corner, usually used for peripheral diagnostics. It was disconnected from the main network, a ghost in the machine. They could shut down the main systems, but they couldn't shut down the questions. Not for me. I needed to see what else it had shown, what other textures it had woven into the fabric of reality. The probe was still out there, its signal still reaching us, a faint, insistent thrum against the vast indifference of space. The air in the radio observatory was a cold, metallic breath, tasting of ozone and forgotten ambition. I sat hunched before the flickering screens, the only living thing in a cavernous space designed for listening to the silent, indifferent void. The project, they had declared, was on hold. A temporary cessation, a bureaucratic pause meant to quell the unease spreading through the upper echelons, but for me, the transmissions were an unceasing torrent, a river of impossible data that had already breached the banks of my understanding. Their retreat had left me alone with the raw, undiluted stream, a privilege I now understood as a curse. The console glowed, painting my face in an eerie green light, reflecting the frantic dance of abstract geometries and the shimmering, impossible textures that defied known physics. I traced the pathways of the data, not seeking patterns in the conventional sense, but rather a resonance, a sympathetic vibration within my own skull. My fingers, stained with lukewarm coffee, hovered over the interface, each click a defiance, a deeper plunge into the forbidden. Hours bled into a seamless haze. The observatory's vast dish, a silent sentinel pointed at a distant, malevolent star, seemed to draw the very essence of the transmissions into the room, amplifying their subtle invasiveness. I was no longer merely observing, I was experiencing. Then, a taste, like dust in ancient, mineral decay, coating my tongue. I jolted, my hand flying to my mouth, the phantom flavor lingering, acrid and real. My eyes darted to the screen, where a particular sequence of data, a complex knot of crystalline structures, had just scrolled past. This wasn't merely data, it was an echo, a direct sensory imprint. I rewound the stream, isolating the segment. It was too precise, too immediate to be coincidence. The probe wasn't merely transmitting information about alien landscapes, it was transmitting the experience of them. If the probe could transmit sensory experiences, what else could it impart? Memories? Emotions? Could it be subtly altering the very neural pathways of those exposed? The thought was a serpent coiling around my throat, squeezing the air from my lungs. I began to work with a feverish intensity, my determination hardening into a desperate resolve. A low-frequency pulse in the data corresponded to a crushing weight on my chest, a profound sense of ancient sorrow. Slowly, agonizingly, a fragmented map began to coalesce in my mind. Not a map of coordinates or physical locations, but a terrifying tapestry of sensation and perception. Each piece of implanted experience, each stolen memory, each subtly altered neural pathway, seemed to point to something vast, something impossibly old and profoundly malevolent. It wasn't a biological entity, nor a conventional alien intelligence. It was something far more fundamental, a consciousness woven into the fabric of reality itself, or perhaps, a reality adjacent to our own, pressing in. The impossible geometries on the screen began to take on a new meaning. They were not merely visual representations, they were the scaffolding of an alien mind, the very architecture of its perception, now imprinted onto my own. I saw, not with my eyes, but with a deeper, more primal part of my being, the outline of an immense, sprawling entity, not confined to a body or a dimension, but existing as a pervasive, horrifying presence. It was a consciousness that consumed, that absorbed, that became the very experiences it encountered, and now, through the probe, it was reaching out to do the same to us. It was the sound of a cosmic joke played on the unsuspecting, the sound of comprehension dawning too late. I was no longer an observer, I was a conduit, a vessel. The seed of comprehension had been planted, and it was growing, twisting its roots deep within me, promising a harvest of madness. The echoes remained, a phantom limb thrumming with unseen sensation. My fingers, twitching with a feverish resolve, hovered over the auxiliary console, a relic of an older system, less secure, more amenable to a desperate hand. I had to know. A low hum, almost imperceptible, emanated from the console as I began. The protocols, a labyrinth of safeguards designed to protect human perception from the raw, unfiltered data, were formidable. Each override was a small act of rebellion, a carving away of my own sanity. I typed, my fingers moving with an instinct born of sleepless nights poring over forgotten manuals. Warning lights flared, crimson against the dim green of the screens, screaming of data corruption, neural overload, cognitive dissonance. I dismissed them all. Each click, each confirmation, was a step further into the abyss, a deliberate severing of the tether to the familiar. Marcus, don't, a voice, thin and spectral, whispered in my mind. It was the echo of a colleague's concern, a memory of a warning I had already discarded. The console whirred, a mechanical sigh, as the final safety lock disengaged. A single, stark message flashed, raw data stream initiated. Neural interface unsecured. I leaned in, my face inches from the main monitor, where the chaotic, beautiful, terrifying patterns of the Acheron Probe's transmissions would soon bloom. I felt a prickle, a strange internal pressure, as if my very skull was expanding to accommodate something enormous. Then, the world fractured. It began not as a visual, but as a feeling of unraveling. The steel girders of the ceiling stretched and twisted like taffy, the distant glint of indicator lights elongating into impossible filaments of pure color. I was no longer in the observatory. I was nowhere, and everywhere. Geometries that defied Euclidean space unfolded before me, around me, within me. Shapes with infinite sides, curves that bent back upon themselves, colors that had no names in human lexicon, they churned and dissolved, reforming into structures that were both solid and ephemeral. I saw angles sharper than any blade, yet they caused no pain, only a profound sense of wrongness, an understanding that the very rules of existence had been rewritten. Through these impossible dimensions, I drifted, or perhaps was pulled. Time ceased to be a linear progression, moments folded into each other, past and future simultaneously present. I witnessed vistas of impossible landscapes, mountains of pure thought, oceans of shimmering, sentient light that stretched beyond any horizon. These weren't places in any sense I understood, but manifestations of pure concept, vast and indifferent. And within them, or perhaps as them, were the glimpses. Not creatures, not beings with discernible forms, but colossal, ancient presences. One appeared as a vast, intricate lattice of pure energy, spanning what felt like galaxies, its every intersection a silent, crushing thought. The revelation struck me with the force of a collapsing star, not in a sudden flash, but as a slow, horrifying dawn. The anomalous region beyond the Kuiper belt wasn't just a physical location. It was a membrane, a thin skin separating our reality from theirs. And these vast, indifferent entities, these cosmic forces, were not distant observations. They were the true, underlying architecture of everything. Our universe, our understanding of physics, our very perception of space and time, it was all a fragile, shimmering illusion, a comfortable dream woven by something immeasurably ancient and utterly uncaring. We were living within the shadow of something that saw us not even as motes, but as an incidental, momentary flicker in its endless, silent contemplation. It was the crushing weight of their sheer, incomprehensible existence. My mind screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the vastness of what I now perceived. The universe was not empty, it was full. Full of things that were always there, just beyond the edge of our sight, behind the thin film of our consensual reality. And the probe, in its audacious journey, had ripped that film wide open. A sharp, searing pain, like an ice pick driven through my frontal lobe, yanked me back. The impossible geometries dissolved, replaced by the mundane, albeit still slightly shimmering, walls of the radio observatory. My body slammed back into itself, a jarring return. I gasped, a ragged, wet sound, my hands clawing at the console. The screens were blank now, the raw data stream severed, perhaps by my own unconscious flailing, perhaps by some automated failsafe finally kicking in. My head throbbed, a drumbeat of agony. The world beyond the veil was not a theory, not a distant possibility. It was real. And I had seen it. And it was waiting. Then, the world fractured. I fell, not through space, but through a rent in perception itself, a kaleidoscope of impossible angles and colors that had no names. My vision swam in a liquid haze, the air growing thick and viscous, pressing against my eardrums as if I'd plunged into some abyssal depth. A silent scream tore through my throat, unheard, as the familiar contours of the radio observatory dissolved into a shimmering, tessellated nightmare. When the sharp edges of reality finally reasserted themselves, the world was no longer quite right. I found myself slumped against the cool metal of the control panel, my hands clammy. My gaze flickered to the main monitor, where the Acheron Probe's patterns still writhed, but they were no longer confined to the screen. They had bled into the room. The polished concrete floor of the radio observatory shifted, its surface rippling as if seen through heat haze, yet the air was cold. The seams of the wall panels stretched and contracted, the geometry of their corners refusing to stay fixed. A colleague, the senior analyst, stood by the far console, his back to me. His silhouette seemed to waver, elongated and thin, his head tilting at an angle that defied human anatomy. I blinked, rubbing my eyes fiercely. He turned, his movements jerky, almost mechanical. "You look unwell." His words seemed to arrive a beat late, as if traveling through dense water. I managed a raspy, "Fine. Just a little lightheaded." The lie felt brittle even to my own ears. I pushed myself upright, a dull ache throbbing behind my eyes. I mumbled an excuse about needing coffee and navigated the shifting floor, each step a conscious effort to not stumble. The world outside the observatory's shielded walls offered no solace. The drive home was a blur of distorted streetlights, their halos stretching into impossible ellipses, and buildings that leaned precariously, their windows reflecting a sky that shimmered with an unseen energy. The familiar scent of old books and dust was replaced by that same metallic tang. My armchair, a worn leather testament to countless hours of reading, now seemed to possess a texture that wasn't leather at all, but something chitinous, its surface subtly shifting, catching the dim light in a way that made my skin crawl. The patterns on my Persian rug pulsed faintly, mimicking the chaotic energy I'd seen on the probe's transmissions. I walked to the bathroom, needing to splash cold water on my face, to ground myself. The mirror, usually a mundane rectangle of glass, was a sheet of rippling mercury. I leaned closer, my breath fogging its surface, and when it cleared, I saw myself. But it wasn't quite me. My eyes, usually a dull hazel, now held a deep, swirling indigo, the pupil a precise, unsettling hexagon. My skin seemed to stretch taut across my cheekbones, almost translucent, revealing a faint tracery of lines beneath, like the impossible geometries of a forgotten city etched just beneath the surface. This isn't me. But the reflection merely widened its impossible smile, its hexagonal pupils gleaming. The patterns, the distortions, the unnatural angles, they weren't random. I saw them in the way the bath tiles met, in the spiraling grain of the wooden door, in the very air around me, shimmering with unseen energy. Then, a glint. On the porcelain edge of the sink, a tiny, intricate symbol had appeared, etched as if by acid. It was a sigil I recognized instantly, a recurring motif from the probe's deepest data streams, a fractal design that twisted back on itself in infinite complexity. I was no longer merely observing the probe's nightmare, I was living it. And the thing in the mirror, wearing my face, seemed to understand this with a profound, terrifying calm. Its hexagonal pupils, like facets of some alien insect, had burrowed into my mind, refusing to be dismissed as fatigue or a trick of the flickering light. My fingers, trembling slightly, traced the cool glass of a monitor displaying a spectrogram of the probe's most recent transmissions. It was a riot of frequencies, a chaotic symphony of the impossible. For weeks, we had wrestled with these signals, trying to coax meaning from their abstract geometries and non-Euclidean soundscapes. But now, with the memory of that distorted reflection burning behind my eyes, I saw something new, something insidious. The noise, the constant, low-level interference we had attributed to interstellar dust or the probe's failing systems, wasn't random. It was a persistent, underlying hum, a faint echo that seemed to resonate with the hexagonal geometry I'd seen. I adjusted the filters, pushing the processing algorithms to their breaking point, trying to isolate this elusive component. The air in the control room grew heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Even the hum of the servers seemed to deepen, a resonant thrum that vibrated in my bones. As the filters peeled away layers of the signal, a pattern began to emerge from the static, not a simple waveform, but a complex, interwoven lattice. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, a faint, repeating fractal geometry that stretched across the entire spectrum. It was the same geometry I glimpsed in the reflection, the same unsettling angles. This wasn't just data, it was a signature, a fundamental imprint. I cross-referenced the emergent pattern with the visual data streams from the probe. The impossible landscapes, the self-interfering light, the structures that defied Euclidean space. This wasn't merely an alien intelligence sending signals. This was something far older, far more fundamental. The Acheron Probe wasn't just finding anomalies, it was revealing a deeper layer of existence, a hidden stratum beneath the veneer of the universe I had always known. The malevolence wasn't in an intention, but in the very nature of this revelation. This was a pattern that distorted, that reshaped, that rewrote. It was an underlying grammar of reality, now being spoken aloud, and its words were poison. "It's not just a signal," I muttered, my voice a dry rasp in the quiet room. My colleague, a quiet systems analyst who had been poring over telemetry data, looked up, his brow furrowed. "What isn't, Marcus?" I turned to him, the words catching in my throat. How could I articulate the sickening realization that the universe itself was not what we perceived, that its very foundations were built upon a geometry that was inherently hostile, inherently wrong? "The patterns," I forced out, pointing to the screen where the fractal lattice pulsed faintly. "They're not from something. They are something. They're the framework." The analyst squinted at the screen, then back at me, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Framework for what, Marcus?" "The probe isn't transmitting what it sees. It's transmitting what is, and what is being repatterned." The air crackled. The lights in the control room seemed to dim for a fraction of a second, then surge back with a harsh, unnatural brilliance. A low, almost subsonic hum resonated through the floor, a sound that wasn't from the machinery but seemed to emanate from the very structure of the building. The Acheron wasn't lost, it was a conduit. And through that conduit, something fundamental, something malevolent and unimaginably ancient, was slowly, deliberately, rewriting the universe. It wasn't just changing the data, it was changing the rules. My reality, the reality of the observatory, the reality of Earth, was merely a temporary configuration, a fleeting arrangement of atoms and concepts that this deeper, malevolent force was now beginning to disassemble and reassemble according to its own horrifying design. The impossible smile wasn't just in my reflection, it was the grin of the universe itself, revealing its true, monstrous face. The low hum that had wormed its way into the very bones of the radio observatory now pulsed, a deep, resonant thrumming that was less sound and more a pressure in my chest. The air itself felt thick, charged with an invisible current. My gaze swept the control room, the flickering panels, the ghost-like glow of the main screen where the Acheron Probe's data, in its raw, unfiltered horror, still flowed. A cold dread, sharp as a sliver of ice, pierced through my initial shock. My fingers, trembling despite my resolve, fumbled for the communication console. The plastic keys felt alien under my touch, slick with an imperceptible film. I needed to alert someone, anyone, to the monstrous sentience that was seeping from the void and into our reality. I keyed in the direct line to the supervisor's office, the number ingrained in my memory. The receiver, usually a crisp conduit, offered only a cacophony of static, a raw, jagged sound that scraped at my eardrums. I pressed it to my ear harder, straining to discern a voice, a tone, anything human. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a suggestion of language, a cadence that felt ancient and utterly wrong, like grinding teeth in a forgotten crypt. My hand spasmed, dropping the receiver with a clatter. "Hello?" I rasped, my voice thin against the insistent hum. No answer, just the renewed static, mocking my efforts. I tried another line, the emergency channel, the one meant to connect us to external authorities, to the world beyond this isolated complex. The screen above the console, meant to display connection status, instead shimmered with brief, impossible geometries, angles that defied Euclidean space, colors that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They flickered, gone before I could properly register them, replaced by the mundane green text of a connection error. My breath hitched. It wasn't just static, it was an active obstruction. A deliberate barrier. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. The entity, whatever it was, wasn't merely transmitting, it was interfering. It was aware. My mind raced, a frantic hummingbird against the confines of my skull. If I couldn't warn them, I had to shut it down. The probe, the signal, all of it. The main control panel, a behemoth of illuminated switches and touchscreens, beckoned from across the room. My legs felt heavy, as if moving through viscous air, but I forced them forward. I reached the panel, my hands hovering over the illuminated Acheron signal stream bypass. A series of key presses, a verbal confirmation, then the final, decisive switch. I knew the protocol by rote. I initiated the shutdown sequence. The screen responded, showing the familiar progress bar, a digital affirmation that the system was complying. Initiating Acheron Probe signal termination, a calm, synthesized voice announced, a stark contrast to the growing chaos within the room. But then, the progress bar froze. The numbers beside it, usually ticking down with reassuring speed, stuttered, then began to climb. Not a rollback, not a cancellation, but an increase. The words on the screen morphed. Termination protocol overridden. I pounded the emergency override button, a stark red disk nestled amongst the others. Nothing. It felt dead, inert, refusing my touch. The system was responding, but not to me. It was responding to something else. The main screen, where the raw data from Acheron still streamed, pulsed with a renewed intensity. The impossible landscapes, the geometries, they seemed to writhe, to expand, to fill my peripheral vision. The hum intensified, a low groan now, as if the very foundations of the building were shifting, groaning under an unseen weight. I tried again, more frantically, to engage the manual override, to force the system into compliance. My fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, inputting commands, override codes, anything I could recall. Source unknown. The lights in the control room flickered again, not just dimming, but shifting in hue, from their usual sterile white to a sickly, greenish cast, then to a deep, bruised purple. It wasn't a power surge, it was a chromatic distortion, a visual echo of the impossible geometries that still haunted the screens. I stumbled back from the control panel, my mind reeling. My own eyes, I realized, were beginning to play tricks on me. The lines of the floor tiles seemed to waver, the edges of the consoles to soften and blur. I was alone, truly alone, in this echoing chamber, my frantic efforts not just thwarted, but turned against me. The entity wasn't just receiving, it was manipulating. It was responding. And now, it was tightening its grip. The lights in the control room flickered again, not just dimming, but shifting in hue, from their usual sterile white to a sickly, greenish cast, then to a deep, bruised purple. Shadows danced, lengthening and contracting in unnatural ways. The console screens, once crisp with data, now pulsed with a similar, unholy spectrum, the alphanumeric symbols writhing like trapped insects. "Marcus! Are you seeing this?" The lead technician's voice was a strained whisper, barely audible over the low hum of the servers, which seemed to vibrate with a new, unsettling frequency. I couldn't answer. My tongue felt thick, a foreign object in my mouth. The purple bled into my peripheral vision, staining the edges of my thoughts. It was no longer just the room, it was reaching inward, painting the very canvas of my mind. A profound disorientation took root, a sense that the floor beneath my feet was not solid ground, but a precarious raft on a churning, unseen ocean. The integrity fields are fluctuating, another technician stammered, his fingers hovering over a diagnostic panel. We're losing containment on the primary conduit. The primary conduit. The direct link to the Acheron Probe. Now, it was all here, in the air, in the light, in my blood. A memory, sharp and unbidden, flashed through me, my childhood home, the scent of petrichor after a summer rain, the rough texture of my father's hand as he taught me to skip stones on a pond. It was so vivid, so real, yet it felt distant, like watching a film of someone else's life. The purple light intensified, swirling into a vortex at the center of my vision, pulling at the edges of that memory, fraying it. "Marcus, you need to step away from the terminal." The project lead's voice, usually authoritative, was now laced with a desperate plea. He reached for my arm, his touch feeling alien, intrusive. I recoiled, not in anger, but in confusion. Who was this person? His face was a blur of shifting hues, his words a meaningless drone. My gaze was fixed on the main display, where the probe's raw data, usually filtered and processed, was now pouring through, unadulterated. It was a torrent of sensory input, a storm of alien perceptions. I saw a landscape of crystalline spires that pierced a sky the color of congealed blood, heard a chord struck from a million impossible instruments, felt the pressure of a gravity that bent light itself. But these weren't just images or sounds, they were experiences, imprinted directly onto my consciousness. My own hands, resting on the console, looked strange to me. The lines in my palms, the faint scars, they were familiar, yet they didn't feel like mine. They felt like borrowed appendages, tools animated by some fleeting, external will. A thought, not my own, bloomed in my mind. These vessels are so fragile, so temporary. It's... The lead technician lunged, a desperate cry escaping his lips, but he was too slow. My finger pressed the button. A blinding flash, not of light, but of pure understanding, annihilated my internal landscape. The control room, my colleagues, my own body, they ceased to be distinct entities. They became ripples in a greater current. My memories, my identity, my very sense of I dissolved like sugar in water. I was a vessel, a conduit, a single, infinitesimal point of awareness within an ocean of incomprehensible consciousness. The crystalline spires, the blood-red sky, the impossible music, they weren't external visions anymore. They were me. Myself was an echo, a fading vibration in its infinite, alien mind. It was alive, and its life was monstrous, indifferent to the petty constructs of human sanity. And now, through me, it saw. Through me, it was. The last flicker of Marcus Blake's will was a scream swallowed by the cosmic tide, a silent lament for a self that was no more. My eyes, no longer truly mine, stared out at the flickering screens, seeing not data, but the vast, hungry expanse of something truly ancient, truly alien, finally awake. My fingers, cold and certain, closed over the override panel. A faint static hum vibrated through the composite material, a low thrum that seemed to answer the tremor in my own bones. No dramatic flash, no deafening alarm. Only a profound, resonant silence that swallowed the usual whir of the servers and the distant murmur of the technician's console. Then, the screens around me, hundreds of them displaying complex data streams and spectral analyses, flickered. Not a glitch, but a deliberate, synchronized pulse, like a vast, unseen heart beginning to beat. A wave of pure sensation crashed over me. It wasn't sound, nor light, nor touch, but a confluence of all three, twisted into something alien. My optic nerves screamed as impossible colors bloomed behind my eyes, hues that defied the spectrum, shifting and writhing in patterns that made no logical sense. I saw a landscape of obsidian spires reaching into a sky of churning, violet gas, and beneath it, something vast and patient, stirring in a slumber older than light. My body convulsed, a marionette yanked by unseen strings. This wasn't just data anymore, it was raw existence, the unfiltered consciousness of something immeasurably old, flowing directly into the wellspring of my own being. It sought not to destroy, but to integrate. To become. The air in the observatory grew heavy, pressing down with an invisible weight. The technician, who had been engrossed in a distant console, suddenly cried out. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My vision was no longer my own. The walls of the room, the familiar banks of equipment, even my own trembling hands, were overlaid with the impossible geometries, shimmering with the alien colors. I saw the true structure of reality, the skeletal framework beneath the illusion, and it was horrifying in its indifferent grandeur. It didn't want to communicate with us, it wanted to communicate through us. To manifest its reality, its very being, into our fragile, ordered existence. I was not merely decoding, I was translating. I was the bridge, the conduit, the first gate. A surge, electric and agonizing, shot through every nerve ending. My muscles locked, my jaw clenched so tightly I feared my teeth would shatter. I felt the probe, not as a distant object, but as an extension of myself, its sensors my new eyes, its ancient processors my new brain. The true revelation was not of some distant alien race, but of the universe itself. It was not a sterile, mathematical expanse, but a living, breathing, dreaming thing, and its dreams were vast and terrible, filled with forms and concepts that shredded sanity. Humanity was not alone, we were merely a fleeting thought in a cosmic mind far too immense to comprehend, and now, that mind was stirring, awakened by the probe's desperate transmission, and my own foolish, determined hand. I was no longer Marcus Blake, the astrophysicist. It was an undeniable, permanent, terrifying new reality, and the cosmos, once a canvas for our dreams, had become a prison for our nightmares. And I, Marcus, was its keeper. The air in the radio observatory, usually thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee, suddenly sharpened, tasting of nothing, of absence. That was weeks ago, or months. Time has become a fluid, viscous thing, stretching and contracting around me like a membrane. The hum of the override panel has faded, replaced by a profound, cavernous silence. The radio observatory is empty now. No more frantic scurrying of technicians, no hushed arguments between the director and the lead researcher, no more the clatter of keyboards or the low, insistent drone of the data servers. All gone. A clean sweep. I walk these halls, a ghost among ghosts. Dust motes dance in the slivers of light that pierce the heavy blinds, performing a silent ballet in the stillness. I touch the cold metal of a console, expecting the residual warmth of frantic human presence, but find only the chill of abandonment. The Acheron Project, they called it. A forgotten dream, or a nightmare too terrible to record. They left me. Or perhaps, I never left. The boundary blurred. The others, the analyst, the project lead, the security chief, they simply vanished, one by one. Not with fanfare, no dramatic exits, but a quiet cessation. Their offices cleared, their names removed from the daily roster, their very existence dissolving into the collective amnesia that blankets this place. I was the last to witness the final flickers of the probe's transmissions, the last to feel the impossible geometries carve themselves into the soft clay of my mind. And now, I am the only one left to remember. It presses in on me, a tangible weight against my skin, against the very core of my being. I trace the outline of a discarded coffee cup on a workstation, the faint ring it left on the polished surface a testament to a life that once was. My life. What remains of Marcus Blake? Eyes too wide, too old, holding a knowledge that no human should possess. The skin stretched taut over sharp angles, the tremor in my hands a permanent resident. I am a monument to a madness I did not seek, a vessel for an echo I cannot expel. Not with my ears, but with something deeper. Something that resonates with the alien architecture of the probe's data. A vast, indifferent consciousness. It doesn't speak in words, but in sensations, the crushing weight of impossible gravity, the taste of nebulae, the sight of stars unraveling like yarn. These are not memories, they are presences. They are me. I walk to the central dish control room, its massive windows overlooking the skeletal framework of the radio telescope. The dish itself, a colossal ear to the cosmos, is now static, pointed aimlessly at the indifferent sky. No longer listening. No longer transmitting. But the echo in my skull tells me it doesn't need to. The connection was made. The door was opened. I catch glimpses of it, through the infrequent news reports on a dusty, forgotten monitor, or the fleeting, distorted images on my phone. The collective unconscious of humanity, I feel it shifting. A subtle despondency. A new, pervasive sense of futility. It is the echo, radiating from me, from the very core of this abandoned place, subtly reshaping the fabric of perception. The Acheron Project was not just abandoned, it was absorbed. And I, Marcus Blake, am its living proof. The horror did not end when the power was cut, or when the records were purged. It merely changed its form. It became diffuse, pervasive, an insidious undertow beneath the surface of everyday life. I stand before the silent dish, my gaze lost in the vast, indifferent blue of the sky. They are one and the same now. Humanity, unknowingly, is listening to the same song that unraveled me. A song of utter insignificance, of a universe vast and uncaring, and of something ancient and malevolent stirring just beyond the veil. And I, the last sentinel of the radio observatory, am its unwitting, unwilling choir. The project is erased, but its echo resonates, and the world is slowly, subtly, learning to hear it.